The year is 1998. Nintendo released their flagship console into the new age of 3D graphics and gaming at least 2 years earlier into the west of 1996. This console would go down in history as a pioneer of its time for its innovation of games, now with the amazing ideas of taking our favorite 16-bit 2D or 2.5D games and turning them into 3D wonders. But then you had things like these while playing on a little butt plug as a controller. Going back to the year 1998, Nintendo would release their fifth and most anticipated game in their second most famous series, The Legend of Zelda. This game would become to be known as The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. This video isn't about Ocarina. Seeing how everyone and their mother, even babies who are fresh out of the womb, know that Ocarina was a revolutionary game for its time as the single greatest action-adventure game to ever exist, unless you're willing to the fast enthusiast, this game took the world by storm, and even today you have a bunch of debates whether this game still holds up. And while the game we're discussing today is also one where Zelda fans alike debate on its placement as the best, that wasn't always the case. In fact, this was a dark time for the franchise in terms of fan enjoyment regardless of the game. But for now, the game we're discussing is Majora's Mask. Released in the year 2000 on the Nintendo 64, Majora's Mask is a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time. Same graphics, same models, same animations, yeah, like how most sequels should be made. This game reused a lot of assets that Ocarina had for its world and aesthetic and general gameplay. The reason why I bring this obvious point up is because the game was made within the span of 15 months. Or a year and 3 months if you're annoying like that. This is because Majora's Mask was originally just a revamped version of Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64 Double D or DD, whatever the hell it is. But Eiji Aonuma wasn't on board with it just being a simple revamp of the dungeons. Shigeru Miyamoto heard this and was like, okay, I hear you, so make a whole other game in a year. This was seen as a fun little challenge for the development team, but only fun in saying. In any game-making environment, an entire year of development time is not nearly enough to really think about the gameplay, side content, upgraded mechanics, music, sound design, and a story all in 1 year. Yet somehow, someway, somewhere, the Zelda team is like the only other team that I know of that can make this kind of deadline. The only other one being Ryuga Gotoku Studios. Because with some other development teams in Nintendo's wing, it's best not to get into all this. I think it's curious to talk about Majora's Mask development alongside the game itself because Eiji Aonuma fucking hates this game. Okay, maybe hate's a strong word, but Aonuma has gone on to say that Majora's Mask truly was a grueling process in terms of making the game, and with how some of his staff really could not handle the full year deadline. And when discussing it with Miyamoto, he couldn't really disagree on making the N64 game, nor could he even refuse the remake, even though Aonuma just really wanted to forget that Majora's Mask even happened. Although he looks back as an experience that paved the way for his involvement in the Zelda franchise today, there were still some aspects that made Majora's Mask, as beloved as it is, were actually really frustrating aspects of the development of the game. The time management system of the game was one of those mechanics that was either going to be confined in Clock Town, but then not confined in Clock Town, but then it was confined in Clock Town, only for it to not be confined to only Clock Town in the final game. That one little sentence was the entire development process of Majora's Mask. I believe a main point of Majora's Mask development that I actually look at fondly in terms of why the game was being made is that Aonuma and his team were challenged to make a game in only a year, especially after the immense success of Ocarina of Time. It's easy to look at your previous project and think, you need to one-up the previous project, you need to one-up that previous game. How are you going to follow up Ocarina as the definitive Zelda game? But that's not what the Zelda team set out to do at all. One thing I always appreciate about how the Zelda team specifically is that they truly focus on the gameplay first over everything. They always want to make the games because the game is fun. It shows a deeper understanding of how the combat will be, how the world will look, so they can make something to morph the entire game into what it is in the final product. And that mindset is still seen with the most recent games in the series, such as Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and the very recent Echoes of Wisdom. With the aforementioned time management mechanic that the entire game is based around, I always saw the idea of this mechanic to be a little bit of symbolism as for how crunched the devs felt when making this game, and how satisfying it probably was to finally get the game done when all hope seemed to be lost. Only for it to be reversed as they would have to start a new project sooner than later if we know the gaming industry. I want to get into the fact that for years, the Zelda fanbase was in a rut for content. Not necessarily for the lack of content, mind you. We got plenty of new games, whether that be for single-player experiences or multiplayer adventures that make me want to end it all. But what made being a Zelda fan low-key kind of annoying back in the 2000s as someone who was only born in 2003 and only got into the series in 2009, is that everyone wanted another Ocarina of Time. And that's just not what Majora's Mask is. MM is probably the most different game in the series in terms of tone and gameplay because of the 3-day time limit. I say probably because Breath of the Wild may have had that beat, but I would argue Majora's Mask still holds the crown for most innovation with what the dev team was going for. I think what makes Majora's Mask stand out to me is that it takes one of my least favorite aspects of video games in time trials, but makes the entire game a time trial, but it's not nearly as stressful as everyone claims it to be. This isn't me claiming to be an absolute legend of Majora's Mask. I mean, if you're really stressed about the time limit, just play the reverse Song of Time. It doesn't take too long to learn if you just fiddle around with the controls. Even the time trials within the dungeons where you have to get to doors and jump on platforms in time all fit within the theme of needing to be perfect with your time management. You have a certain amount of time to reach the door, unless you're Aaron, and you take 20 million fucking years! I think in terms of time management, I feel this game is the best out of any game I've played. Of course, the first game that comes to mind when it comes to taking your time in a video game is Persona 5. And that game is... So Persona 4 has the exact same idea of managing your time, and while that game is pretty good when it comes to managing deadlines, hanging with the game's NPCs, and more, I feel like Majora's Mask does all of that in tenfold. Almost every NPC has their own life, their own schedule. You literally have to keep track of it in a freaking notebook from the Bobby Hill looking motherfuckers. I think the NPC that shows this the best is the postman. Every single day in Clocktown, you see this man go on his merry way throughout, delivering mail and never missing a deadline. His entire life is the schedule of the game, much like how it's Link's life within the game. Even when the moon is crashing down, he wants to flee. He's begging to flee, but it's not in his schedule. This man is so hardworking and so dedicated to licked up pieces of paper that he's willing to be crushed to death by the freaking moon. Unless you help him by giving him a letter to the mayor's wife during the extensive Anju and Kafei side quest, having him deliver it, and now he finally has the say to leave. The postman shows every aspect of what every YouTuber or Zelda blogger ever says about Majora's Mask. This one NPC that seems invisible is present just as much as you are in the 3-day cycle. His life revolves around the schedule of other characters, and his inclusion in the game brings forth a super important item which is needed for quite possibly the most overpowered ability in any Zelda game. This man is simply fantastic. Plus, his drip is immaculate. I think one more aspect of this game I should mention is one that I hear a good amount of discussion for, but simply not enough. The music. I would consider music to be the third most important aspect of any Zelda game. First being dungeon design, second being combat. Music is half of what you're going to experience in these games. It's the reason why Midna's Desperate Hour doesn't hit as much in Twilight Princess, because that damn best track in the game gets constantly interrupted by the stock battle theme every 5 seconds. The music in Majora's Mask feels jaded. It feels claustrophobic in some areas like Great Bay Temple or the Spider Houses, and sometimes it feels overwhelming like the Stone Tower Temple and Woodfall Temple. Each region of the game has the feeling that this world isn't real, and if it is real, it is a world of suffering and a literal nightmare. Woodfall and the Southern Swamp in general has this gurgly, murky feel that fits with the fact that Majora's influence turned the water into a poisonous sludge. Snowhead feels somewhat normal, being a winter tundra, but it has that feeling of winter lasting longer than it really should, in a snowy environment. And Akana has the literal feeling of death and rot as you're walking through dirt and rock, with a place that has no inch of life, but rather crawling with low-life assassins and undead abominations. That's not to say Majora's Mask is just depressing, though. I feel a lot of people often look at the depressing aspects of this game a bit too much, because while yes, a big factor of this game is the sad undertones, I feel the music shows the true nuance to this world that others just may look past. There's the iconic Clocktown theme that spirals into chaos as the 3 days go by. There's the reuse of Zora's Domain's theme with Zora's Hall, but instead it has a seashell xylophone feel for it. And even the Deku Phallus has a theme that screams authority and order, which is just hilarious and kind of adorable when you realize it's a bunch of small tree people. Who are actually savages, because remember, they tried to burn a freaking monkey alive. If you were to ask anyone what their favorite Majora's Mask song was, chances are the answers would vary from the usual. Final Hours, Clocktown, maybe any of Majora's battle themes, or maybe even the title card's opening. But if you were to ask me what my favorite song was in Majora's Mask, I would probably have to say Oath to Order. Because, dare I say it, Oath to Order is the single most satisfying piece of music within this game, even compared to the likes of the Song of Healing. I think for me, it's the omen of beating the game, but also an omen of what you should expect for the finale. You're on this quest thrusted onto you by Tail to stop the Skull Kid's tantrum over Termina, and at first you have no idea who or what the four who are there are. And yet when you beat the Woodfall Temple for the first time, and you hear that song, and then you see what they are, it all makes sense now. Not to mention when you finally get the Giants together at last after being sealed away by Majora, but it's this beautiful yet tense scene that plays almost exactly how the cutscene of the moon crashing the Termina plays. You watch as these Giants slowly make their way to Clock Town, the moon just barely missing the clock tower, but this time, the moon is stopped even if it's for a temporary state. This is kinda cheating, but I think the version done by Smooth McGroove only amplifies the song by like 10,000. I think it's just the art of acapella in nature. That or probably his majestic beard. One final note on the Oath to Order that I think makes this my favorite song in the game. There's a side story that you can do with the All Nights Mask where you stay awake for granny stories that would normally make you fall asleep. You learn about these four giants and the Skull Kid, though not by name, and you learn the tragic story of how their friendship fell apart, due to Skull Kid's immaturity and misunderstanding. But by the end of the game, that small skippable story is given its finish line with the giants reassuring the kid that he was and always will be a friend. And what song do they play to signify this? I can gush about Majora's Mask for a good long while, but I've made my point crystal clear by this point. And I would also be repeating the same things that people say about this game all over the internet. But I think that just shows just how big of an impact Majora's Mask has on the Zelda community as a whole. Much like the clock in the game, this game just has a grip that never lets go no matter how much you try to run away from it. Maybe it's the dungeon designs, maybe it's the overworld, maybe the abundance of side quests that can rival the likes of Shin Megami Tensei 4 or even Breath of the Wild as one of the most extensive games in gaming history. But whatever reason you or I may love this game, I think this is one of those examples of not only showing the true beauty of its image shown through time, but with that time, it shows just how timeless of a video game Majora's Mask is. You could boot up the N64 version on Virtual Console or the unofficial PC emulation and still have a great time with an actual controller in your hands this time. You could play the 3DS version and feel just as good and maybe enjoy some of the newer additions to that version compared to the original. And for those of you who are wondering which version of Majora's Mask do I prefer, both are good. I genuinely never cared about the comparisons of the two games. While I may have a soft spot for the original, the 3DS remake is just as good of a version as any other version that could have been. Even if Aonuma didn't really want to make the remake, like he didn't want to make the original. This isn't an original Yakuza 1 versus Yakuza Kiwami debate where there's clearly a winner. It's a debate that could be finished with this one simple phrase. Just pick the one you want. Who cares? Majora's Mask, to me, was from that golden age of Zelda games where the ideas were bright and the future of the series kept on progressing in every aspect of what developers make for a video game. I believe Majora's Mask to have some of the best artwork, best advertisements, best merchandise, and the best commercials amongst any other Zelda game's marketing campaign, only really being beaten by the Robin Williams Ocarina of Time 3D commercial, or the Japanese A Link to the Past commercial. Majora's Mask may be one hell of a stressful game to play for some, but for me it's the challenge in both the sanity and wit of the player that draws me in, just like the glowing eyes of that demonic mask drawn in the Skull Kid. Except for me, it wasn't a mask, it was a cardboard or plastic box, depending on which version of the game that I would be holding, I guess, I don't know. It's a game that I will always hold dear to my heart, as it's a game about love, loss, hatred, acceptance, forgiveness. It's about a lot of things. It shows the very reality of people. It shows us how to move on from loss, and it shows us how we can keep moving on to the next adventure. And due to recent events, I wanted to rewrite this entire video to make this a journey of reestablishment as to why I love this game in all of its aspects. While it won't be disclosed, that journey of reestablishment has left me to realize that this game truly is special. And I'm very confident in saying that Majora's Mask will always be my favorite video game of all time. And to leave this video off, I wish to recite a quote from the game's most mysterious character, right at the end of our journey. Whether there is a meeting, a parting is sure to follow. However, that parting need not last forever. Whether a parting be forever, or merely a short time, the rest is up to you. With that, please, excuse me.